The seafood arrived dead on time and wrong in every other way. Nobody in that kitchen knew it yet, but in exactly 40 minutes, a 9-year-old girl in a school uniform was going to walk between a billionaire and her mother and stop the most powerful man in Korean hospitality, cold with 11 words. Steam hissed off the line. Copper pans screamed against burners. Through the pass, chandeliers threw gold light across a room full of diplomats, actors, and a food critic who hadn't smiled once all night. And in the center of it all, Monica Brooks stood with her knife still in her hand and her apron already halfway off, staring down a man who had just told her, in front of everyone she worked with, that she no longer belonged in her own kitchen. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Then a small voice cracked the silence in half. "Don't yell at my mom like that." Every head in that kitchen turned at once. A 9-year-old girl, backpack still on, knees visibly shaking, walked straight between the chairman of Hansong Hospitality Group and her mother, and did not stop until she was close enough to look him in the eye. She was trying to protect your customers. Kang Ji-hoon, the man employees privately called the Iron Chairman, a man who had never once been interrupted mid-sentence by anyone in that building, looked down at the girl, and for the first time all night, something in his certainty cracked build. If a story about a 9-year-old standing up to a billionaire to protect her mother is exactly the kind of thing you needed to see today, hit subscribe right now before you forget. This channel exists for stories like this one, and there's a lot more coming. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's go back 6 hours, to the moment nobody saw coming. 6 hours earlier, nobody in that building knew what the night would cost. The morning started ordinary enough that it was almost insulting, in hindsight, how little warning any of them got. In a cramped office, 3 floors below the dining room, Daniel Choi sat with his phone, face down on the desk, like it might bite him if he looked at it. It had buzzed 4 times in the last hour. Each time, the same contact name. Each time, he let it go to voicemail. He'd made a deal 8 months earlier that had felt, at the time, like the kind of small, invisible corner cutting everyone in the industry quietly did. A supplier kickback, a few points shaved off the seafood contract in exchange for a standing discount that landed, conveniently, in an account with his name on it and nobody else's. It had covered a gambling debt he still hadn't told his wife about. It had felt, for 8 months, like a problem that had already been solved. Tonight, it stopped feeling solved. The supplier had cut corners on cold chain shipping to hit a deadline, and Daniel knew, the second he heard the seals were compromised, exactly whose fault that actually was. Not Monica's. Not the truck driver's. His. He picked up the phone on the 5th buzz. "You need to fix this," the voice on the other end said. Flat. "Already done negotiating. Tonight. Or I start telling people who's been getting a discount nobody approved." Daniel closed his eyes. "I'll handle it." He didn't know yet how he was going to handle it. He only knew, with the cold clarity of a man who had run out of better options, that somebody else was going to have to absorb the cost of his mistake tonight, and that it almost certainly wasn't going to be him. He caught his reflection in the dark office window, and, for exactly 1 second, looked like a man who hated what he was about to do. Then he straightened his tie, and the look was gone, replaced by the practiced calm of someone who had learned that confidence, worn convincingly enough, could substitute for being right. Upstairs, none of this had reached the kitchen yet. Monica Brooks was 34, a widow, and for 5 years now, the sous chef at Maison Hansong, one of the most decorated Korean fine dining restaurants in America, owned by a hospitality empire most of her co-workers had never once seen the top of. She had come from Houston with a husband, a dream of her own restaurant one day, and a stubborn belief that food should never lie to the person eating it. She left Houston with none of that except the stubbornness. David died on a construction site 3 years into their marriage, and grief had taken the loud parts of her and left the quiet, load-bearing parts behind. She cooked, she raised Naomi. She showed up early and left last. That was the whole plan now. Every afternoon, Naomi walked the 6 blocks from school to the restaurant, dropped her backpack in the corner of the staff lounge, and did her homework under the hum of the walk-in compressor. The dishwashers had a running arrangement, none of them ever discussed out loud. Whoever finished a dessert plate with extra crema, or a broken tool, by accident, left it within Naomi's reach. The waitresses braided her hair before service, when Monica was too buried in prep to do it herself, arguing cheerfully over whether a French braid or a fishtail suited her better that day. Mr. O, the porter, had worked in restaurants since before Monica was born, and called her his little granddaughter in an accent thick enough that the first time he said it, Naomi asked her mother, seriously, whether that made him actually her grandfather now. She was the only child most of the staff had ever watched grow up in real time, one shift at a time, and every single one of them would have said, without hesitation, that the kitchen was better for having her in it. Tonight was not a normal shift. Tonight was the Korean American Cultural Excellence Gala, the single biggest night of Maison Hansong's year, and rumor in the kitchen was that a Michelin inspector might be sitting somewhere in that dining room right now, fork in hand, deciding the restaurant's fate, one bite at a time. Which was exactly the wrong night for a shipment of premium seafood to arrive with its refrigeration seals cracked. Monica lifted the lid on the first case and didn't need a thermometer to know. The smell told her everything a label couldn't. Of course, she muttered, not even looking up. Of course tonight. She snapped the lid back down like she was closing a coffin. You couldn't have shown up broken on a Tuesday, a slow Tuesday, when nobody's watching, when I could have just quietly murdered you, and nobody would have noticed. One of the line cooks, Priya, laughed despite herself. Talking to the fish again. The fish started it. The fish can't start anything, Monica. The fish is dead. Exactly. Dead and still causing problems. Very on brand for seafood. But under the joke, Monica's stomach had already dropped. She knew what this meant. 60 covers deep into the busiest night of the year, and the seafood course, the signature course, the one the whole tasting menu built toward, was compromised. She found Daniel Choi near the pass, adjusting his cufflinks like a man rehearsing calm he didn't feel. The seafood's bad, she said, flat, no apology in it. Daniel's face didn't change for a second too long. Bad how? Seals were cracked in transit. Internal temps climbed. It's not spoiled. It's not safe either. There's a difference, and tonight we're on the wrong side of it. Define not safe. Define it yourself, Daniel. You've got a nose. He didn't laugh. Replacing it costs us 90 minutes minimum. We have investors in that room. We have a critic in that room. We have... He lowered his voice, glancing past her shoulder, like the walls themselves might be reporting back to Seoul. We might have inspectors in that room. Then they should see us, send back bad fish. That's the job doing its job. Monica. Daniel stepped closer, and something in his tone shifted from manager to something colder. No one will notice. I will. A beat. Do you enjoy paying rent? Monica went very still. You have a daughter, he said, quieter now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Think about Naomi. For one long second, Monica closed her eyes and did exactly that. She saw Naomi's face. She saw the apartment they could lose. She saw herself explaining, again, that they had to leave somewhere else, that had started to feel like home. Then she opened her eyes, untied her apron with steady hands, and set it on the counter like she was laying down a weapon she'd decided not to use. I won't risk someone's life to save your reputation. That was the exact moment Kang Ji-hoon walked into the kitchen. He hadn't told a single person in Los Angeles he was coming. Ji-hoon had built his reputation, rescuing his family's hospitality empire after his father's death by refusing, flatly, permanently, to tolerate carelessness where guests were concerned. Anonymous reports had reached him in Seoul, claiming standards at his American flagship were slipping. So he'd boarded a plane, told no one, and walked straight into the one night that could least afford a surprise inspection. He took in the frozen kitchen, cooks not cooking, Plates cooling untouched under the heat lamps, a general manager standing very still. "What happened?" he said. Not a question, a demand wearing the shape of one. Daniel answered before Monica could open her mouth. She refused to cook during the busiest service of the year. Ji-hoon's eyes went to Monica. He didn't ask her side. He didn't need to, not in his own mind. A kitchen standing frozen on the most important night of the year told him everything, and he'd learned a long time ago that hesitation in a crisis was its own kind of failure. "Do you understand how many people are depending on you tonight?" Monica's jaw tightened. She wanted to explain. She opened her mouth. Daniel's eyes cut to her, sharp and warning. "Accuse me without proof, and you'll never work in this city again." She didn't need him to say it out loud. She'd seen exactly that happen to other cooks before. She said nothing. She lowered her head instead, and every second of silence looked to Ji-hoon, like exactly the confession Daniel had already handed him. "If you refuse to fulfill your responsibilities during the most important service of the year," Ji-hoon said, each word landing like a verdict, "perhaps you no longer belong in this kitchen." It hurt more than shouting would have. Shouting she could have argued with. This was quiet, final, and delivered like a math problem that had already been solved without her. The whole kitchen held its breath. Even the exhaust fans seemed to quiet down. And then a small voice came from the doorway. "Don't yell at my mom like that." Every head turned. Naomi Brooks, backpack still on one shoulder, homework folder still in her hand, walked straight between the chairman of a billion-dollar hospitality empire and her mother, and planted herself there like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times, even though she hadn't rehearsed it at all. Her knees were shaking. She didn't stop. She was trying to protect your customers. Ji-hoon looked down at her. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he had absolutely nothing prepared to say. If you've ever wanted to be brave in a moment like that, for someone you love, when everyone else stayed quiet, comment 11 words below and let us know. And if this story's already got you leaning forward, now's the time to like this video, because it's about to get a lot more intense. Naomi wiped a tear off her cheek with the back of her hand, furious at it for showing up. She hasn't even eaten today because she's been cooking for everyone else. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. "Please don't punish my mom for doing the right thing." Nobody in that kitchen moved. Priya lowered her head. Even Mr. O, who had seen 40 years of restaurant chaos, went still. Ji-hoon didn't respond to the girl right away. Instead, he walked past her, past Monica, straight to the seafood cases stacked by the walk-in. He lifted the lid himself. He didn't need 40 years of experience to know what his nose already knew. He pulled out his phone and called the head quality inspector directly. Not Daniel, not a manager, the inspector, by name. A number most people in that building didn't even know he had memorized. 4 minutes later, the verdict came back exactly the way Monica already knew it would. The seafood should never have entered that building. The seals had been compromised before it ever reached the truck. Ji-hoon's next question was quieter, and worse for Daniel than anything shouted could have been. "Who approved this supplier's contract renewal last quarter?" Daniel's silence answered the question more completely than any denial could have. Ji-hoon lowered the phone slowly. He turned back to Monica, and for one long moment, nobody in that kitchen breathed. Then, in front of every single employee, the Iron Chairman, a man who had never once been seen apologizing to anyone in that company's history, bowed. "I'm sorry, Chef Brooks." The kitchen didn't just gasp. It stayed gasped, frozen, disbelieving, like the air itself needed a second to catch up. Daniel was suspended before the bow had even fully finished. 2 security staff walked him out through the back, past the very cases he'd tried to force into service, and nobody in that kitchen looked away from him as he went. His phone buzzed once more on the way out, the same contact name lighting up the screen, and this time he didn't even glance at it. Replacement seafood was rushed in. Service resumed 90 minutes late, but resumed. And somehow, because Monica Brooks was, underneath everything, Exactly as good at her job as her staff already knew, the gala became one of the best-reviewed nights in the restaurant's history. The critic wrote 3 sentences the next morning that would matter more than anyone in that kitchen realized yet. In the walk-in, 20 minutes after the seafood verdict came back, Priya found Monica alone, sitting on an overturned milk crate, with her hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline she hadn't had time to feel until now. "You good?" "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." Priya sat down on the crate next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For what it's worth, every single person on that line would have done exactly what you did. Most of us just wouldn't have had the nerve to actually do it. I didn't have the nerve either. I had a 9-year-old. Same thing, honestly. Out in the dining room, Mr. O had quietly appointed himself Naomi's personal security detail for the rest of the night, walking her back to the staff lounge with one weathered hand resting on her shoulder like she might need steadying, even though she was the one who just steadied an entire kitchen. "You were very brave," he told her, in the accent she loved. "I was really scared." "That is what brave means, little one. If you are not scared, it is not brave. It is just easy." He patted her shoulder once, firm. "You were not easy tonight. You were brave." Naomi thought about that for the rest of the night, turning it over the way she turned over anything an adult said that sounded like it might actually be true. The next morning, Monica walked into Ji-hoon's temporary office at the restaurant and set an envelope on his desk before he'd even said good morning. He read it twice, like the second reading might change what it said. "You're resigning." "I am." I apologized. In front of everyone. "You did. And I appreciate that, more than you probably understand." Monica kept her voice level, which took more effort than anything she'd done the night before. "But every time I walk back into that kitchen, I'm going to remember standing there while everyone watched me get judged before anyone bothered to ask me what happened, including you." Ji-hoon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He'd run companies through hostile takeovers, board revolts, a father's sudden death, and this was the first time in years he had no counter-argument ready. "For what it's worth," Monica added, softer, "the bow mattered. I'm not pretending it didn't. It's just not the same as being trusted in the first place." "I deserve a fresh start," she said finally, and meant every syllable of it. Before she left the building for good, she gathered the line for the last time. No speech prepared, no dramatics, just the truth, as plainly as she'd say it to anyone. "I'm not leaving because of last night," she told them. "I'm leaving because of every night before it, where I told myself the discomfort was just part of the job. It isn't. It shouldn't have to be." She looked at Priya, then Mr. O, then the rest of the line, all the faces that had watched Naomi grow up, one shift at a time. "You're all better cooks than this kitchen has given you credit for. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, including a paycheck." Priya hugged her hard enough to lift her half an inch off the ground. Mr. O said nothing at all, just squeezed her shoulder the way he'd squeezed Naomi's the night before, and that was somehow the part that almost broke her composure. She picked Naomi up from school that afternoon, believing, with total certainty, that she had just seen the last of Kang Ji-hoon. She was wrong, but it would take 3 months for either of them to find that out. Back in Seoul, Ji-hoon sat through 2 board meetings that week and heard almost none of either of them. He kept replaying the same 4 seconds, a 9-year-old walking between him and a woman he'd just publicly humiliated, saying something true that he should have found out for himself before he ever opened his mouth. His assistant noticed first. "You've read that quarterly summary 3 times and haven't said a word about it." "It's fine." "It's not fine. It's the same page. You haven't turned it." He didn't correct her. That night, alone in an apartment large enough for a family he'd never quite gotten around to starting, he did something he hadn't done in years. He looked something up that had nothing to do with the company. A local Los Angeles food blog had run a short piece 2 weeks earlier about a new Korean Southern fusion spot that had opened quietly in Koreatown, run by a chef nobody in the industry had heard from since she'd abruptly left one of the city's most decorated restaurants. The photo was grainy, the review lukewarm, mostly about the bulgogi. He read it 4 times. He told himself, the first time he booked a flight back to Los Angeles under a different name than the one on his corporate card, that he was simply checking in on quality standards at a competitor. He knew, even as he told himself that it wasn't true. He just wasn't ready yet to say out loud what it actually was. Monica spent every dollar she'd managed to save in 5 years on a storefront in Koreatown, barely big enough for 8 tables. The paint peeled. The stove was older than some of her cookware. The landlord had thrown in a walk-in cooler that made a sound like a dying accordion every time it cycled on, and Monica, exhausted, had started naming its noises after moods. The 3 a.m. groan, the passive-aggressive click. Everyone who saw the lease thought she'd lost her mind, and for the first 2 weeks, quietly, so did she. Naomi did not share the doubt. To Naomi, an empty storefront with peeling paint was simply a blank page, and blank pages were the best kind. "Can I pick the color of the door?" she asked, the first afternoon they stood inside together, dust still settling from the previous tenants' abandoned furniture. "You can pick the color of the door, green, like the kind in the cartoons, where you know something good is going to happen behind it." Monica didn't have the heart to tell her 9-year-old that doors didn't work that way. She painted it green anyway. Instead of another fine dining menu, she did something nobody expected. She cooked exactly what she actually was. A Texas girl who'd spent 5 years learning Korean technique from the inside. Smoked brisket bulgogi. Kimchi mac and cheese that shouldn't have worked, and absolutely did. Gochujang glazed fried chicken. Sweet tea steeped with Korean pear. Some days, 2 customers walked through the door. Some days, none did. Naomi helped after school anyway, drawing cartoon menus for the handful of kids who came in, greeting every stranger like they were already regulars. One Tuesday, the only customer was a man who came in purely to use the bathroom and left without ordering anything. Naomi watched him go and turned to her mother with total 9-year-old sincerity. At least he liked the bathroom. Monica laughed for the first time in a week, and it surprised her how much she needed it. Another slow night, Naomi took it upon herself to write a Yelp review for the empty dining room out loud, narrating to nobody in particular. 0 customers, 0 stars, would not recommend showing up on a Tuesday. She paused, considering. Actually 5 stars for the chicken. 0 stars for the customers who aren't here to eat it. You're grading customers who don't exist. Somebody has to hold them accountable. 2 weeks into the new restaurant, a landlord's notice arrived, taped to the green door. 1st month's late fee. A polite but firm reminder that the grace period wouldn't extend a second time. Monica stood in the doorway reading it twice, the same way Ji-hoon had once read her resignation letter twice, as if a second pass might soften what the first one had already made clear. She didn't cry. She'd used up her crying budget for the year already, or so she told herself. She folded the notice, put it in the drawer with the other bills, and went back to prepping brisket. Because the brisket didn't care whether she felt like crying or not, and neither did rent. That night, after Naomi had fallen asleep at the counter over her homework, Monica sat alone in the empty dining room and let herself, just for a few minutes, wonder if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The old restaurant would have taken her back. Daniel was gone. Someone would have smoothed it over. She could have had a paycheck again, a walk-in that didn't groan like a dying accordion, a life that didn't require praying the reservation book, filled up before the landlord's patience ran out. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to look over at Naomi asleep, with a crayon still in her hand, and then she stopped thinking about it, because some decisions, once you make them for the right reasons, aren't actually decisions anymore. They're just who you are now. 3 weeks in, the door opened, and a man in jeans, a plain shirt, and a baseball cap walked in and ordered dinner like anyone else. Monica recognized him instantly. She served him anyway, exactly the way she'd serve anyone. He ordered the fried chicken, picked up the chopsticks laid beside his plate, a habit from a different cuisine entirely, and spent a solid 30 seconds trying to eat gochujang glazed fried chicken with them before giving up and reaching, defeated, for the fork. Naomi watched the entire ordeal from the counter with open delight. "You know it's fried chicken, right? Not sushi." "I am aware," Ji-hoon said, with the dignity of a man who had just lost a battle in front of a 9-year-old and knew it. "A billionaire," Naomi announced to the empty room, "just lost to a chicken wing." He came back the following week, and the week after that. Sometimes he sat alone, reading reports over the fried chicken. Sometimes Naomi wandered over, between homework, and asked him blunt questions no adult would dare ask a billionaire. "Why do you always eat alone?" He didn't have a ready answer for that one either. Another evening. "Are you following us?" He nearly choked on his tea. Monica, mortified, started apologizing on her daughter's behalf, and Ji-hoon laughed, actually laughed, for what felt like the first time in years. "Should I be worried?" Monica asked once, only half joking, watching him fold his napkin with the same precision he probably used on shareholder reports. "Extremely," he said. "I've started looking forward to a 9-year-old's cross-examinations more than board meetings." That's a low bar. You'd be surprised how low. One quiet Sunday, after close, Naomi sat coloring at the counter, while Monica did the books in the booth behind her. Out of nowhere, the way kids do, Naomi asked, "Do you think Dad would have liked the chicken?" Monica's pen stopped moving. He would have asked for the recipe and then insisted he could make it better. Could he? No. But he would have tried, and it would have been a disaster, and we would have eaten it anyway and told him it was great. Naomi smiled at that, small and real. "I don't really remember his laugh anymore. Is that bad?" Monica set the pen down and came around the counter, crouching to Naomi's eye level. "It's not bad. It's just what happens with time. And it's not your fault, and it doesn't mean you loved him any less." She tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "I remember it enough for both of us right now. One day, I'll tell you exactly what it sounded like, and it'll be like you're hearing it again. Promise?" "Promise." Naomi went back to coloring, and Monica went back to the books, and neither of them said anything else about it, because sometimes the moment doesn't need anything else added to it. One evening, Naomi asked him, the question nobody else at the restaurant had worked up the nerve to, "Why don't you have kids?" Ji-hoon set down his tea. "I never had time to want them. And then one day, I looked up and everyone I knew had them, and I thought maybe that door had closed without me noticing." "Doors can be repainted," Naomi said, with the confidence of someone who had personally picked the color of one recently. Ji-hoon almost laughed, and then didn't, because something about the way she said it landed harder than she meant it to. "My father died when I was younger than you'd guess. A chairman becomes one," he said, quieter now. "One day, I was a son. The next, I was running a company with 4,000 employees who all needed me to know what I was doing, when I didn't. Not really. Not for a long time. There wasn't room to grieve him properly. There wasn't room for much of anything, except making sure the company didn't fall apart, along with everything else." Naomi considered this with the seriousness she reserved for things that mattered. "That sounds lonely." It was. "Is it still?" He looked at her, and then past her, toward the kitchen, where Monica was calling out an order, laughing at something Priya had said. "Less than it used to be," he admitted. He never asked Monica on a date, never once offered her money, never tried to fix her life with his wealth, the way a man with that much of it usually would. He just kept showing up, one plate at a time, like a regular customer, because, though he never said it out loud for weeks, that was exactly what he wanted to become in her life. Not a chairman, a regular. One rainy night, the door opened to a line out onto the sidewalk. A respected food critic, the same one from the gala, had published a glowing piece calling Monica's cooking the most honest fusion food in the city. A Korean actor filming nearby posted a photo of his plate online the next day. Reservations started stacking up, faster than Monica could answer the phone. She later found out, almost by accident, that Ji-hoon had never paid for a single mention. He'd simply told people whose opinions he trusted that her food deserved to be found, and then let it be found on its own terms. The sudden attention was not, in practice, the fairy tale it looked like from the outside. The phone rang so often that Naomi appointed herself receptionist purely out of necessity, answering with a level of authority no 9-year-old should legally be allowed to have. "Thank you for calling. We're booked through next Thursday. No, I can't make an exception. No, not even for that. Goodbye." Click. She turned to her mother, entirely unbothered. "That was somebody's assistant trying to bribe me with movie tickets." "You said no to free movie tickets?" "I said no to a bribe. There's a difference. Also, I don't even like that movie." The kitchen, meanwhile, buckled under a volume it had never been built for. 2 burners for a dining room, now doing the covers of a place 4 times its size. Priya, hired on within the first month, unable to stay away once she heard what Monica was building, burned an entire tray of gochujang chicken during the Friday night rush and threw both hands up at the ticket rail. "We need a bigger kitchen, or we need to stop being good at our jobs, because right now, both things can't be true at the same size." "Working on it," Monica called back, plating 3 orders at once with the kind of speed 5 years at Maison Hansong had trained into her hands, whether she wanted it there or not. It was chaos, and it was loud, and some nights it felt one bad ticket away from falling apart entirely. But it was chaos she owned outright, with her name on the lease, and her judgment as the only one anyone had to answer to. That difference, she found, made the 16-hour days feel almost nothing like the ones that used to leave her hollowed out by close. For the first time since David died, Monica caught herself smiling without noticing she'd started. One evening after closing, a staff member called in sick, and Ji-hoon, without being asked, grabbed a rag and started stacking chairs. Then he picked up a sponge and started on the dishes. No hesitation, no performance, like he'd done it 1,000 times, which he clearly hadn't. He fumbled the industrial sprayer twice and soaked his own sleeve before he figured out the trigger. Naomi watched from the counter, then leaned toward her mother. "I don't think rich people usually do that." Monica smiled, watching him wring out his sleeve with as much composure as he could muster. "I don't think he does either." Over the months, friendship became something neither of them rushed. They talked about food, about failure, about the father Monica had lost her own restaurant dream, watching Cook Barbecue in Houston. Ji-hoon admitted, quietly, that becoming chairman had cost him something he hadn't noticed losing, the ability to just eat a meal without it being a transaction. For the first time in years, both of them were healing in the same direction. Then the ground shifted under both of them at once. During a routine internal audit, Ji-hoon found a name buried 6 years deep in a subsidiary contract file, a construction company, the same one responsible for the site failure that had killed David Brooks. Executives who no longer worked for the company, but had once answered to it, had buried the safety reports and quietly settled complaints to keep the story from ever reaching a headline. Ji-hoon sat with that file for a long time before he did anything else. He hadn't caused it. He hadn't even been chairman when it happened. But the company he now ran had benefited from a silence that had cost Monica her husband and Naomi her father, and he was the only person left who could choose what happened next. He told her himself, in person, no lawyers in the room, no statement prepared in advance. Monica went very quiet, and it was a different quiet than the kitchen that night. Not the silence of holding something in, the silence of something breaking that couldn't be unbroken. "Say that again," she said, slowly, "because I need to hear it a second time before I let myself understand it." He said it again, slower. It didn't get easier to hear the second time. "I'm not shattered because you did this," she finally said, and her voice shook in a way it hadn't even the night Daniel threatened her rent. "I'm shattered because the company connected to the man I've started to love is the same company that helped bury what happened to David. I know. Do you? Because David, isn't a line item you can fire your way out of fixing. He isn't a supplier contract you can cancel. He's the reason Naomi doesn't remember what her father's laugh sounded like, and every year that gets a little further away from her, and it's never coming back, and you're standing here, telling me your company is sorry. I'm not telling you the company is sorry, Ji-hoon said, quiet, but not backing away from her. I'm telling you I am, and I know that doesn't fix anything. I'm not here to be forgiven tonight. I'm here because you deserve to hear it from me instead of finding it in a court filing. He didn't argue further. He didn't defend the company or himself or ask her to see it his way. He just said, take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to pressure you to forgive something that isn't mine to be forgiven for yet. Then, he did something that mattered more than the sentence itself. He launched an independent investigation with outside auditors he couldn't control the outcome of. He fired every executive connected to the cover-up, including 2 people who'd been loyal to him personally for over a decade. He cooperated fully with authorities, even when his own legal team advised him not to. And he built a permanent safety and accountability program across every property the company owned, not as a press release, but as policy that outlived the news cycle. If you're the kind of person who believes doing the right thing should cost you something real, or it doesn't count, smash that like button right now, because this story's about to bring it all the way home. The public hearing, when it came, was not the tidy formality Ji-hoon's legal team had hoped for. It was 3 hours long, held in a downtown conference room with too many cameras and not enough air conditioning, and it started with a shareholder attorney standing up before anyone had even been sworn in. Mr. Kang, you're telling this room that you voluntarily exposed a cover-up your own company benefited from, at cost to your own valuation, out of, what, conscience? Yes. Forgive me if that's a hard sell. You don't have to buy it, Ji-hoon said. You have to read the audit. The findings are public. I made sure of that, specifically so nobody in this room has to take my word for anything. A second questioner, sharper, isn't it convenient that this investigation happens to coincide with your personal relationship with a victim's widow? The room went very still. Monica, sitting in the back row, felt every eye that recognized her turn briefly in her direction. Ji-hoon didn't flinch. The audit started before I knew her name was attached to the file. I didn't choose the timing. I chose not to bury it once I found it, which is more than the people running this company chose to do 6 years ago. A pause. If you'd like to ask whether that relationship makes this harder for me personally, the answer is yes, it does. That's not a reason to have hidden it. It's the reason I couldn't. A third questioner pressed further before he'd even finished sitting back down. Your legal team advised against full public disclosure. Why override them? Because full disclosure was the only version of this that let me look Chef Brooks in the eye afterward. Everything else was just a slower way of hiding the same thing. That's a personal reason. Shareholders may want a business one. The business reason is that a company willing to bury a death to protect a quarter's earnings is a company that will eventually bury something bigger. And by then, it won't be a hearing like this one. It'll be a headline, none of us survive. I'd rather take the hit now, on my terms, than wait for one I can't control. For 3 hours, he answered questions that could have ended his career, and didn't dodge a single one of them. Not the ones about liability, not the ones about the settlement payments, not the one, late in the afternoon, from a reporter who asked flatly whether he expected to keep his position after this became public. He answered that one too, and didn't pretend to know the answer for certain. For 6 weeks after he told her about the file, Ji-hoon didn't come to the restaurant. He kept his word. No pressure, no showing up under a different name, no chance encounters that weren't actually chance. He sent nothing. He asked for nothing. He simply waited, the way he'd said he would, without knowing whether the waiting would ever end in anything. Naomi noticed first. He hasn't come in a while. I know. Did you ask him to stop? No. I just needed time to think. Did you finish thinking? Monica almost laughed at the bluntness of it, the way only a 9-year-old could ask a question that big like it was a homework deadline. Not yet. Almost. It was Naomi in the end who tipped the scale, though she never knew it at the time. She came home from school one afternoon and announced, apropos of nothing, "I looked it up. The company fired the people who did the bad thing. All of them, even the ones who used to be his friends." She said it simply, the way kids report facts they've decided are important, without fully understanding why. That seems like a lot to give up for someone you're not even sure will forgive you. Monica sat with that sentence for a long time after Naomi went to bed. The next morning, she called Ji-hoon herself for the first time since the file. "I'm not done being angry," she told him. "I don't think I ever will be, entirely, but I don't want to spend the rest of however long we have being angry at the wrong person for something the wrong people did. You didn't do this to David. You just refused to keep hiding it. And that's not nothing. That's actually the opposite of nothing." Watching him do that, Monica thought of a kitchen on the busiest night of the year, and a woman who'd taken off her apron rather than serve something she knew was wrong. They were more alike than either of them had let themselves admit. Forgiveness didn't arrive all at once, and Monica never pretended it did. The past didn't get smaller just because the truth finally came out. But slowly, she came back around to him, not because what happened to David could be erased, but because Ji-hoon had chosen the harder, costlier truth in a moment when a quiet lie would have been so much easier to live with. A year later, Monica's restaurant had become one of the most sought-after tables in Los Angeles. The 8 tables were gone. There was a wait list now that stretched around actual weeks, not days. The green door Naomi had picked out was chipped from 400 hands pushing through it every week, and Monica had never once considered repainting it. 2 weeks earlier, back in Seoul, Ji-hoon's assistant had stared at the acquisition paperwork on his desk for a long moment before saying anything. "This building has no connection to any Hansong property. No synergy, no brand tie-in, nothing the board can point to as strategy. I know. They're going to ask why the company is buying an empty storefront in Koreatown with no stated business purpose. It's not the company buying it," Ji-hoon said, sliding a personal check across the desk instead of a corporate one. "It's me." His assistant looked at the check, then at him, and allowed herself, for the first time in the 11 years she'd worked for him, an actual smile. "You're going to make the board very confused and very nervous. They'll survive it. I did." One evening after closing, Ji-hoon asked her and Naomi to walk 3 blocks with him to an empty storefront. Confused, Monica followed anyway. He handed her a single key. "I didn't buy you a restaurant," he said, quiet, no performance in it at all. "I bought an empty building. The dream inside it is still entirely yours. You'll design it, you'll build it, you'll run it." A pause, and something that might have been the closest thing to shy she'd ever seen on him. "I'll just be your first customer, every time." Monica's eyes filled before she could stop them. Naomi grinned so wide, it looked like it might not fit on her face. "Can the door be green?" Naomi asked immediately. "The door can be whatever color you want," Ji-hoon said. And Monica laughed through the tears, because of course, that was the first thing her daughter asked. On the new menu, tucked between the brisket bulgogi and the fried chicken, sat a single item Monica had never put on any menu before. A smoked barbecue plate, Houston style, no Korean flavors at all, no fusion twist. Just her father-in-law's recipe, cooked exactly the way David used to attempt it, and always slightly ruin. She named it simply David's Plate, and told the staff it wasn't for sale, so much as it was for remembering. Though of course, people ordered it anyway, and every single one of them left a good review, without knowing why it tasted like more than barbecue. Naomi asked about it once, tracing the name on the menu with one finger. "Is this the one he would have made better? This is the one he never quite got right. I like it better that way. Perfect wouldn't have been him." Months later, the grand opening filled the block. Chefs, journalists, members of the Korean American community who'd followed every step of Monica's climb, from 8 tables to this. Naomi walked to the front of the room, carrying a framed drawing she'd made years earlier, and never shown anyone until now. It showed 3 people standing outside a restaurant: herself, her mother, and a man she'd once demanded stop yelling. "When I was little," Naomi said, "I drew him smiling, because I hoped one day he actually would." She looked over at Ji-hoon, standing at the edge of the crowd, and grinned. "Now I don't have to imagine it anymore. And also," she added, deadpan, to the room's genuine laughter, "he still can't use chopsticks on fried chicken. Some things don't change." Priya, now Monica's head of kitchen, raised a glass from the back of the room to the chef, who took her apron off instead of her standards. Mr. O, seated near the front, in a suit that clearly hadn't been worn in years, dabbed his eyes with a napkin and pretended it was allergies. The food critic from the gala, seated near the window, was already typing notes on her phone for what would become the second glowing review of Monica's career, this time with no lukewarm sentence about the bulgogi anywhere in it. The room erupted. Real laughter, real applause, the kind that doesn't happen on cue. Ji-hoon reached for Monica's hand. This time, she didn't let go. The girl who once stood trembling between her mother and a billionaire now watched the two of them stand together, not because his money had built any of this, but because honesty, and a kid brave enough to speak up in a frozen kitchen, had built something none of them saw coming. If this story hit you, the way it hit us putting it together, don't scroll away yet. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment with the one line from this story that stuck with you the most, and share it with someone who still believes doing the right thing is worth it, even when nobody's watching. We'll see you in the next story.